Welcome to Truth Behind History, where we break down the forces that have shaped our world, one story at a time. Today, we're diving into a topic that has fueled economic growth, sparked political battles, and even led to outright conflicts: tariffs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Tariffs? That sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry. But trust me, these little taxes on imported goods have shaped US history in ways you wouldn't believe. So, what exactly are tariffs? At their core, they're taxes placed on imports. Think of them as toll booths for foreign goods trying to enter the US market. But tariffs aren't just about collecting money, they're used to regulate trade, protect domestic industries, and sometimes even retaliate against foreign policies. In fact, throughout American history, tariffs have been at the center of economic strategy, funding the federal government, sparking trade wars, and influencing economic growth. From the early days of the Republic to modern-day disputes over globalization, tariffs have played a critical role in shaping the US economy. So, how did it all begin? Let's take a step back to colonial America, where the foundation for US trade policy was first laid. Before America was even its own country, trade policies were already a source of tension. Back in the colonial era, Britain controlled trade under a system known as mercantilism, which, in simple terms, meant that American colonies weren't allowed to trade freely with other nations. Instead, they were forced to buy and sell goods exclusively with Britain. This meant high prices, limited economic freedom, and, you guessed it, frustration among American merchants. Fast forward to 1789, after the US won independence, and one of the very first laws passed by Congress was a tariff. The tariff of 1789 wasn't just any old tax, it was a foundational economic policy designed to serve two main purposes: first, to fund the brand new federal government, and second, to protect young American industries from foreign competition. But perhaps the biggest champion of tariffs during this time was none other than Alexander Hamilton, yes, the guy on the $10 bill. Hamilton believed that for the US to become a strong and independent nation, it had to protect its own industries rather than rely on imports. His vision was clear: by imposing tariffs on foreign goods, American manufacturers could grow and compete on a national scale, making the country less dependent on European economies. So, while today we often think of tariffs as political tools, back then they were seen as a matter of national survival. But as the US economy evolved, so did its use of tariffs, sometimes with unintended consequences. And that brings us to the 19th century, where things started getting a lot more heated. As the US entered the 19th century, tariffs became more than just a tool for funding the government, they became a source of fierce regional conflict. Some people saw them as a way to build a strong national economy, while others saw them as a direct attack on their way of life. One of the most notorious tariff laws of the 1800s was the Tariff of Abominations in 1828. And yes, it was actually called that. This tariff dramatically raised import duties, particularly on manufactured goods. The goal? To protect northern industries from foreign competition. The problem? The southern states weren't happy. The South relied heavily on imported goods, and these higher tariffs meant higher prices for everyday necessities. Southern leaders were outraged, with some even threatening to nullify the law, meaning they wouldn't enforce it within their states. This crisis became known as the Nullification Crisis, and it nearly led to a full-scale conflict between the federal government and South Carolina. It was only resolved when Congress passed a compromise tariff in 1833, but the debate over tariffs, and their role in the economy, was far from over. Now, let's talk about the Civil War era. During this time, the North and South had very different economic models. The industrial North supported high tariffs to protect American factories, while the agrarian South wanted low tariffs to keep import costs down. When the Civil War broke out, the Union government ramped up tariffs to fund the war effort, further cementing the divide between the two regions. By the late 19th century, tariffs hit new heights with the McKinley Tariff of 1890. This was one of the highest tariff rates in US history, designed to give maximum protection to American industries. But like many extreme economic policies, it had unintended consequences, raising consumer prices and sparking backlash from both businesses and consumers. So, as the 1800s came to a close, tariffs had evolved from a simple tax policy to a full-blown economic battleground. But if you thought things were intense in the 19th century, just wait until we step into the 20th century, where tariffs played a role in booms, busts, and even war. As the US entered the 20th century, tariffs became a double-edged sword, sometimes boosting the economy, and other times sending it spiraling into chaos. Let's start with one of the most infamous tariffs in American history, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930. This was the tariff to end all tariffs, literally. Passed during the early days of the Great Depression, it raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. The idea was simple: protect American businesses by making foreign products more expensive, encouraging consumers to buy American. Sounds good in theory, right? Well, it backfired. Other countries retaliated by imposing their own tariffs on American exports, which meant U.S. farmers and manufacturers suddenly lost access to foreign markets. Trade collapsed, and instead of helping the economy recover, Smoot-Hawley made the Great Depression even worse. Economists today almost universally agree this was a disastrous policy. After World War II, the U.S. did a complete 180-degree turn on trade policy. Instead of pushing tariffs, America led the charge toward global free trade. Enter GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, established in 1947. This was a landmark agreement aimed at reducing global tariffs and increasing international trade. Fast forward to 1995, and GATT evolved into the World Trade Organization, WTO, which still regulates global trade today. But perhaps one of the biggest game changers in modern trade policy came in 1994 with the North American Free Trade Agreement, better known as NAFTA. This eliminated tariffs between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, creating a massive free trade zone. Supporters argued it boosted economic growth and strengthened ties between the three nations, while critics claimed it led to job losses in American manufacturing. So, by the end of the 20th century, the U.S. had shifted from a high-tariff protectionist economy to a champion of free trade. But of course, history never stays still, and in the 21st century, the debate over tariffs and trade was far from over. Now, if you thought tariffs were just a relic of the past, think again. The 21st century has seen tariffs make a dramatic comeback, sparking trade wars and global economic debates. One of the most significant tariff battles in recent history kicked off in 2018, when President Donald Trump imposed steep tariffs on Chinese imports. The goal? To reduce the U.S. trade deficit with China and protect American industries. The result? A full-scale trade war, with China retaliating by slapping its own tariffs on American goods, everything from soybeans to automobiles. Some industries benefited from Trump's tariffs, particularly domestic steel and aluminum producers, which suddenly had a competitive edge over foreign imports. But on the flip side, American consumers and businesses were hit with higher costs on imported goods, leading to price increases in everything from electronics to household products. Then came President Joe Biden, who took a slightly different approach. Instead of immediately rolling back tariffs, he kept many of Trump's policies in place, but focused more on renegotiating trade agreements. The result? Tariffs remained a key tool in U.S. economic policy, as America balanced protectionism and globalization. And this debate is far from over. As we move deeper into the 21st century, questions about tariffs and free trade continue to divide economists, politicians, and business leaders. Should the U.S. focus on protecting its industries and bringing manufacturing back home? Or should it embrace globalization to keep trade flowing smoothly? This leads us to our final section, the real-world impact of tariffs and what history can teach us about their consequences. So, after all this talk about tariffs, you might be wondering, are tariffs actually good or bad? Well, like most economic policies, it depends on who you ask and when you ask. Let's start with the pros. One of the biggest arguments in favor of tariffs is that they protect domestic industries. By making foreign goods more expensive, tariffs encourage people to buy American, which helps local businesses grow. They can also create jobs, as domestic companies gain a competitive edge and expand their operations. And, of course, there's the revenue factor. Historically, tariffs were a huge source of income for the U.S. government, helping to fund everything from infrastructure to national defense before income taxes became the main source of revenue. But it's not all good news. Tariffs come with some serious downsides too. One of the biggest cons is that they often lead to higher prices for consumers. When foreign goods become more expensive, domestic businesses often raise their own prices since there's less competition. So, in the end, everyday people, you and me, end up paying more for things like cars, electronics, and even food. Then there's the risk of trade wars. History shows that when one country imposes tariffs, other countries retaliate, just like we saw with the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930, or more recently, the U.S. China trade war. This back and forth can slow down global trade, hurt exporters, and even lead to economic downturns. And finally, there's the issue of global supply chains. We live in a world where products are made using parts from all over the globe. When tariffs disrupt trade, it can cause delays, shortages, and price hikes, impacting industries that rely on imported materials. If history has taught us anything, it's that tariffs are never just a simple fix. They can strengthen economies in one era and devastate them in another. And this brings us to our final discussion: where do we go from here? So, after looking at over 200 years of US tariff history, what's the final takeaway? First, tariffs have always been a key part of American economic policy, whether as a tool to protect industries, fund the government, or retaliate in global trade disputes. From the tariff of 1789 to modern trade wars, we've seen how tariffs have shaped economic growth, regional tensions, and even global conflicts. But the big question remains: should the US focus on protectionism or free trade? Supporters of protectionism argue that tariffs are essential to defend American jobs, industries, and national security, especially in sectors like manufacturing and technology. They believe that outsourcing has hurt the US economy and that tariffs can bring jobs back home. On the other hand, advocates of free trade argue that lowering tariffs encourages economic growth, keeps prices low for consumers, and strengthens global partnerships. They warn that trade wars and high tariffs can backfire, leading to higher costs, economic instability, and retaliation from other countries. And looking ahead, the future of tariffs is still uncertain. As globalization and technology reshape the economy, governments will continue debating how much protectionism is too much and whether tariffs are still an effective tool in the modern world. So, what do you think? Are tariffs a necessary shield for American industries? Or are they a costly obstacle to global economic growth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more deep dives into history's most fascinating economic battles. Also, check out some of our other videos if you love learning about how history has shaped the world we live in today. Thanks for watching Truth Behind History, and I'll see you in the next one.